As we traveled around Israel and the Palestinian territories, we noticed a common theme. And it was not just about politics or even the Bible. The common theme was the decorations. Everywhere we went, Bethlehem to Jerusalem, Nazareth to Galilee, every holy site was embellished with icons, statues, shrines, candles, brass bric-a-brac of all kinds. And on top of every holy place was a massive church and layer upon layer of ruins of other churches that had been destroyed on that same spot. Among the most elaborate was in Bethlehem, on a hilltop where it is said that Jesus was born. Centuries worth of candles, mosaics, brass lanterns were everywhere in this very crowded and kind of stifling church. And in a curious modern touch, hanging from every chandelier were Christmas ornaments. It's Christmas every day in Bethlehem. All of these shrines were built layer upon layer, century upon century, to worship God and glorify Jesus as a majestic king like those described in the Old Testament. Now, there is nothing wrong with any of that, but we had to mentally peel away the layers to imagine what each place might have looked like when Jesus walked the earth. And then it struck me that the same people who built these glorious edifices also knit together the collection of stories, letters, and documents that became the Christian New Testament. And rather than sift facts for accuracy as modern people might do, the writers of the New Testament did just as they had done with the holy shrines. They added layers and layers of textual adornment to glorify Jesus as a majestic king. The layers are sometimes so thick that the first century Jew we know as Jesus almost fades out of sight. Almost, but not quite. Today, we get a remarkable window underneath the layers of text to see the very human reality of Jesus of Nazareth. This window comes in the Gospel of Mark, which is generally agreed as the first written account of the life of Jesus. It is important to note that in the Gospel of Mark, there is no Christmas story, no Virgin Mary, no wise men, no manger or shepherds in the field, no swaddling clothes, no ornaments hanging from the chandeliers. We know this man as Jesus, which is a mangling of his real name in Hebrew thanks to bad English translations. His mother knew him by the common Hebrew name, Yesu or Joshua. The Latin Yesu and the Spanish Jesus is closer to the Hebrew than the English Jesus. We also get a glimpse today of his mother, who we know as Mary. Her real name in Hebrew was Miriam. There is no mention of Mary's husband in Mark's account, so we can safely assume that by the time we meet her in the Gospel of Mark, she's already a widow. Jesus is not an easy child. Another gospel writer, Luke, who draws heavily from Mark, tells us Jesus slipped away from his family as a young boy and hung out for days at the temple in Jerusalem before his family finally caught up to him. He is not an easy adult either. As a young man, Jesus disappears into the desert on a religious vision quest. Jesus is not much older than an adolescent when he disappears. Chances are he wandered in the desert not just for the symbolically significant 40 days, but probably for many months, maybe many years. In Mark, Jesus is not the Jesus of stained glass windows or a perfectly pressed white flowing robe with a lamb on his shoulder. That's not the Jesus we get in Mark. He is far, far different than that, and much more interesting and challenging. When we meet up with Jesus in today's gospel lesson, he is back from the desert in his home territory in northern Israel as a faith healer, and he is teaching people with pithy stories and riddles called parables. He is different than the child they once knew, and everyone notices this, and everyone notices a spark in him they had never noticed before. When people touch him, they feel connected to the holy in a way they have never felt before. And many are healed in ways they cannot explain, but they know they are healed. In this passage today, we hear a very awkward story that we might be tempted to overlook. A story about how his family is very, very worried about him. There are rumors that Jesus has lost his mind, that he is crazy, unhinged. The local religious authorities are nervous for good reason, and they start spreading rumors he is possessed by a demon. Mary and her family are very alarmed, and for very good reason. And even worse, Jesus attracts crowds, big crowds, and crowds attract Romans, and that terrifies Mary. The Romans are of a mind that any large gathering can turn insurrectionary at any moment, and the Romans do not take kindly to that sort of thing. So Mary, with Jesus' siblings, go to find him. And yes, Mary has other children besides Jesus. Jesus is not an only child. His family pleads with Jesus to come home, get out of harm's way. But Jesus won't go with them. And then he tells the crowds that he is already home. The people gathered around him, he says, "You are my family. Here are my mother and my brothers," he says. "Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." In this moment, he casts off all family and social conventions that had previously defined him. This is a big deal. We don't know how Mary and Jesus' siblings take this rebuke, and they probably hear this as a rebuke. And we know that in time, they will come to understand this wayward prodigal son. But not yet. His mother Mary will be there with him at the end, at his death on the cross. His brother James, his real name is Jacob, who with the disciple Peter will become the acknowledged leaders of the early church. But that's at the end of the story, and we are not yet at the end of the story. Today, we are still at the beginning. We are in this crucial moment when Jesus proclaims that tribal loyalties, family ties, ethnicity, nationality, religious ties, politics of every manner, none of this is anything compared with the divine bond connecting him with all of humanity. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother, he proclaims. And we do well to remember and celebrate that on this Pride weekend, Jesus includes everyone, no exceptions, especially those who over the centuries have been shunned, pushed away, cast adrift from the church. And we especially remember this weekend our LGBTQ siblings who have endured that for centuries. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother, no exceptions. Jesus stands with everyone on the border of the holy, as author Bill Countryman puts it. Jesus stands on the border of the holy, bridging the divine with the earthly. This experience so sears the souls of those who first followed Jesus that they begin to feel the fullness of God's love all around them and deep within themselves. They also begin to understand who God has created them and us to be. Servants of each other, servants of this hurting world, healers, peacemakers, each of us doing the will of God, each in our own way, together. These first followers go on to discover that after his death, he is still with them, changed, different, new, but still the one they recognize as Jesus. They still know him deep, deep inside. Well, not everyone got it, not at first. And truthfully, none of us fully get it. It takes a lifetime. Following Jesus then as now is not easy. It does take a lifetime for Jesus' family to catch on, to figure him out. Why would that be any different for us? Yesu, Jesus, Jesus, by whatever name you know him, makes no promises that his way of life will be easy. His way is not conventional or convenient in any age, including ours. And this is why we need to walk this path together, holding each other up when we fall, praying for each other when we just cannot pray, doing God's will as best as we can figure it out together. Why would we want to do this alone? We can't really do this alone. When we walk this path together, when we risk opening ourselves to the unexpected, to the surprising, the holy, we might just find ourselves standing together on the border of the holy, at the very gates of eternity, bringing forth God's dream for this world to be healed. And when we do, we will discover who God created us to be, siblings with the risen Christ, who is not just in the heavens, but here on earth and walking with us always. No exceptions. Amen.